Hi, Kathy here from Kathy's Cute Creations. Let's begin. To begin our project, we're going to use this fabric called muslin. Muslin is a cheap fabric to use when you want to do practice. Like if you were going to make a garment, you would actually make the entire garment out of this kind of a fabric, which it is 100% cotton, by the way. You'd make it out of this because it's usually it's $1 something a yard, $2 a yard, wherever you buy it. And then that is your practice sheet. And then when this works, you make all your adjustments to it, and then you would make the correct garment in the fabric that you pick. This way you don't waste a lot of your fabric, which is more expensive when you're going to make your outfit. So that's what we're going to use for the lining. We're going to need these 3 rulers and the rotary cutter to make the lining, as well as making the sleeve that goes over the lining. The lining will be a little bit smaller than the sleeve. The very first thing that you need to do is measure your door at the bottom. We're going to pretend this is the bottom of your door. Here is the frame of the wall. You're going to measure not only the entire door, but you want to come out a few inches of the frame. That's going to be the length of your lining, and then your sleeve's going to be just a little bit bigger. So you want this to butt up against your door to hold the draft. Then you want to, after you figure out the length, you can take a piece of fabric or a sheet of paper. I used a piece of fabric I had downstairs, and I put it up against my door and on the floor so that you have an idea of the distance for the width that you're going to make it. In my case, my door is a little different in the entrance to my home compared to the door in the back. The one in the front actually has a piece of wood that drops off from the door. So I've had to measure, and keep this in mind when you're measuring. You're not just measuring the distance between the door and then where you want to stop. You're going to have to fold that over and double it, because you're making a circle is what you're making to put stuffing in. And I'm going to be using rock salt as my filler. You can use sand, rocks, the rocks that you get in a fish tank. You can use the little beads that you buy at the store. Rock salt that I'm using is a non-clump, and it's an old-fashioned rock salt that I don't even think they have anymore. I just still have some that doesn't melt if it gets wet, because you want to keep in mind that if this is at your front door, which is where this is located for me, when you move this, people are going to walk in with wet feet. This thing may get moved over to the side and be on dampness, which means if it gets into the fabric and this was to melt the rock salt in there, that thing's going to be heavy and solid. So you don't want that. You want it to be able to move. And I'll show you when I'm all done how this will wiggle and everything. So first we're going to work on the lining, and then from there we're going to make the sleeve. The very first thing that I do is I take this fabric off of the bolt here. And because this is going to be the ruler I'm using, which has a rotary cutter attached to it, and it's not long enough, so I fold this in half. And it doesn't even need to be all the way in half. Just enough to clear that rotary cutter on that ruler. You want to get it the sides. Let's fix this here. And we're going to clean up the seam. So to square it, I smooth it out, I put it across the line here and over the edge of a line here. This ruler has the cutter already on it where you can see the blade. You turn it to lock it where you can't see the blade and get cut with it when you put it up. I lay it down here. I think I need to pull this a little bit so that you can see it. Make sure there's 14 inches. This is what you got to keep in your mind, 14 inches. So you just push down on this blade, swipe it, that's it, it's clean. Now what you do is you count from here. Well, I count from here, so 14 is right here. Always count twice and cut once, or count 3 times and cut once. because it's easier to just recount than to accidentally cut off a ½ inch or an inch too short. 14 is at the 23 inch mark. Bring my blade back, put it on 23, put pressure on here. And there we go. And here is the entire thing. Now all I have to do is measure 40 inches because this is a really long piece of muslin. And I will take my selvage off the edge here. I will just measure out 40 inches. Now that I've got it 40 inches, we're going to cut it off here. I'm going to take this strip over to the ironing board. Now at the ironing board, we are ironing to straighten this out before we sew it. If you would prefer to use spray starch, you can. I don't normally use the spray starch. I normally use Best Press is what it's called when I do use starch. You can make homemade. There's a lot of YouTube videos about making homemade. Now we'll take this over to the sewing machine. I will go ahead, and there's really not a right or a wrong side on this fabric. I'll go ahead and start it with a couple of pins, and I will sew 1/4 inch. And I'll actually start on the fold here. And you want to lock it in place. You don't want any of that rock salt or sand, whatever you're putting in here, you don't want any of it to fall out. You can always go over it again when you're finished if you feel like you need to. I'm just straightening it and holding it together as I go along. Reposition some more. Always keep my needle down whenever I'm sewing. Coming up here to the end. We're going to lock it in place again. Now we're going to turn it inside out, and because mine is so big, it shouldn't be that hard to turn it inside out. If yours is smaller, you can always use tools to turn it inside out. Actually, I can put my arm in mine and poke the corners. And then I will go over here to the mat and I'll show you. This is what I have my stuff in. This was my, I ran out of my, this that I bought at the PetSmart for my dogs. So I filled it up with that rock salt that I had down in the basement. And I just take it and literally pour it in. Usually I have 2 people to help me, but I'll just get it started. Anyway. Let's see if I can just do a little bit at a time. Like that. And you just keep taking it down to the end. And then you want to fill it up until it's loose like this, so that you can mold it up against your door. You do not want it tight like that, because then there's no molding factor to it, and that won't get up against, in my case, it won't get up against my door because it's too stiff. It has to actually be loose so I can put it up against my door, since I've got that lift on it. So when I get done filling this up, I'll be right back and show you what it looks like. Alright, now I finished stuffing it, and as you can tell, it's movable. So I'm going to take it downstairs, put it in front of my door to see that it works. If not, I'll take some out or I'll add some. And then I'll take this to the machine and I will put it anywhere between a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch. I mean, I can get it at a 1/4. Put it together like that and then sew it down. And I'll show you that here in a second, as soon as I find out that this works for the door before I actually seal it shut. So here's what's happened. I went ahead and took it downstairs to see if it would fit in front of the door, and it's actually too small. So I cut out more of this fabric. I cut out 10 more inches to add to it. I took out the stitches up at the top, and I am sewing this extra piece onto the first piece. And in this case, I am having to pin it all the way around. Well, I don't have to, but it's easier if I do. Just as if it was the piece to start out with. That's how you add on to something. Then we go to the tail end. There we go. All right. So let's sew that, and you put the right sides together. In other words, don't turn it inside out or anything. Let me see if I can move this a little bit and show you here. Here it is, all pinned together. And you just take your time when you sew it, because it's not a large opening. And here we go. We'll get it going around here. Go ahead and lock your seam there at the beginning. There we go. And then just slowly sew it. I'm going to have to move this up a little bit here on the table. Okay, it's got to give. You could also, if you have an arm, if your bed comes off of your sewing machine and you have a little arm, you could do that too. If you don't know how to use that and you're scared right now, we'll do that in another video. I'll show you. Don't worry about it. Just take your time. You're just keeping your material flat. And even if you did this wrong, remember this is just the inside lining. So it doesn't have to be perfect. You're just stuffing it. Coming up here to the end. Probably can't see it with all this bulk here. And I've got it too close. So. Now let me show you what I've done. Since it had a mistake and I had to add more on, instead of the seam being on the inside, which is me dumping all of this rock salt back out, and the reason I didn't do that is I actually used that entire container and went down to the basement, filled it up again, and I'm going to end up putting more in it. So I would have to go get a trash can or something to dump all this rock salt out. So what I've done is I folded in my fabric here 1/4 of an inch and pinned it. And I'm just going to sew it right here on the outside. That's why I said it does not have to be perfect. This is just the lining on the inside. This is not the sleeve. I'm going to go ahead and sew this. And I'm going to lock it in place. Coming to the tail end here. Lock it in place just like before. Now again, I'm going to go downstairs, put it up against the door to make sure it fits. I'm going to continue sewing here. Finished. There we go. Now I'm going to go over to the mat and measure out the fabric that I'm using for the cover, and I'm going to measure out the same way. The only difference is I'm going to add, because now this has stuffing on it, or stuffing in it. This is how I'm going to measure it. This is my extra fabric that I had, same kind of fabric. I'm going to put it up underneath here. Make sure it's real thick right there. And bring it over here. And that is going to be loose enough. Here's the end. Well, actually, I'm going to fold this back because you're... And then I would fold it back as if I was sewing it to give it enough room. So I'm going to guess right here. And I'm going to take this off of here. Cut my selvage off. And it made a fold. So right here where the selvage is, which is right there. And then I'm going to measure this here. 15. It ends up being 16 and a half. So 2.5 inch more to make the sleeve versus the lining. So I'm going to get my fabric out here. And I need 16.5 inches wide versus 50. And let's see if I have this at 50. Which I think it is. And this is that fuzzy stuff. Let me see here. And let me give you an idea why I'm turning it. Okay, this is the kind of fabric that has a lot of give. First I was going down this direction, but no, I was going down this way. So you can see all the give. So that would be a problem sewing that. So I'm going to go down there, which has no give, and see if it's long enough. And I don't think it is. No, it is not. So therefore, this is going to be it's not that you can't do it. It's just that you don't want it to stretch. And it looks like there is enough. So yes, I have the 50. And let's see, how much more do I have here? All right, so we're going to use the whole thing in the sleeve. So let's go over and sew it. Now I've got to cut the 16.5, which I forgot just a minute ago. So I measured it twice and cutting it once. Now we can go to the sewing machine. Now to make this easier to handle, I went ahead and I pinned it. And because I'm going to baste this because this is so slippery, and I'll have an easier time, not that I'm planning on taking it out, but since it's easier to use a large stitch, that's what I'm using. I hope this is not all too confusing. And yes, we will lock it. And this is the non-stretchable side. Okay, back her up. And let's see if we can do this here without stretching too much. See if I have a... Let's see if I can try this stitch here. Might not. No, that's too small. That's not going to work at all. All right, I'll try it again here. There we go. Get it up there. Kind of pushing it up at this end so it doesn't bundle up and stretch too much. I don't want it to pull. And looking at it, my pinning wasn't too good either. But I can fix it as I go along here. Just pull the underneath piece as I sew. And I did not straighten out this end. That's why it's not even here. I didn't cut it because I figured I'd let it get as long as it needed to get so I could test it downstairs before I actually tied it off. Alright, so I'm going to turn it inside out and hopefully it's going to fit. I tried to get all the part that's got all the fuzzies on it on the inside. I shook it on the table over there before I came over. Here it is sitting in front of my door. This is the entrance to my home, and it really does keep a lot of that draft out. Of course, the problem's going to be if somebody tries to come in the door, but we'll see. Anyway, it turned out really good. Shame the lighting isn't a little bit better, but it's really nice. I hope everybody had fun making this, and I hope you did make one, and if you don't, you do in the future to keep your drafts out of your house. Now here's a couple of them that I took out of the window to show you that I had made some previously. The black one goes in my bathroom and it has rice in it, so it's got a little give, as you can see, so it forms to the window. Same with this one. It's got a little bit of rice in it, and I put it in the window here in the sewing room behind the curtain. It holds the back curtains up against the wall, which also keeps a draft out. Thank you all for watching my videos. Give me a thumbs up, subscribe so you can see more, and if you want to make a comment, by all means make a comment or email me. Take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.